50 years ago this summer, my mother left behind her village in rural Thailand to travel 400 miles north to a U.S. military base on the border of Laos. The year was 1970. It's during the Vietnam War. And my mother, the oldest of five, had recently lost her own mother and had been charged with the task of supporting her family. On Sakon Nakhon military base, my mother served as the manager of an officers' club for U.S. soldiers. She quickly earned a reputation for herself. She was very good at operating a Honda motorcycle. She was known for playing hoops with American soldiers and for singing along verbatim to Elvis songs despite having very limited English. That summer, she met a young officer from a place called New England. They fell in love, were married, and in a decision that would change her life forever, she decided to return home to New England with him. But not everyone in my mother's family was so optimistic about the possibilities that awaited my mother in the United States. As a wedding present, one of her aunts gave my mother a gold bracelet. When your marriage fails in America, the aunt told my mother, sell this bracelet for a plane ticket home. For the next several years, my mother pursued her version of the American dream. She was a waitress at Howard Johnson's while putting herself through community college nursing school. She bought her first home with my father. In 1977, my sister, Tantawan, was born. 2 years later, I came along. And then, not long after, my father left my mother for an American woman, leaving my mother in Maine to raise my sister and me here alone. I'll never really know what went through my mother's head during that period of her life. I know only that she had a very important decision to make. She could sell the bracelet that her aunt had given her and bring us back to Thailand, or she could stay in Maine and raise us as Americans. 5 years ago, I came to UNH to teach storytelling. I love my job. I love working with young people during this strange period of their life when there is so much gray and blurriness, when they're hanging out in between adolescence and adulthood, when the future is so full of uncertainty but also thrumming with possibility. Oftentimes, after class, freshmen will stop by my office with this look in their eye. I know that look. I've seen it a million times. Often I'll ask them to tell me about who they are and where they're from. And more often than not, they'll shrug and say something sort of diminutive, like, oh, I'm just from New Hampshire, or I'm from a small town up north. And I often feel like my job is to teach them that this story of who they are, where they come from, their origins, can be the foundation of the person they will become. But I still think that something else has to get me out of bed in the middle of the winter on the 7 a.m. train to campus. And oftentimes when I'm riding south on the Downeaster, I'll look out the window at the small towns of New England. And I'll find myself imagining an invisible line, a line that, in my mind, begins in my mother's village of Phnom Salakam, Thailand, and snakes its way up the length of the Mekong River, crosses an entire ocean, a country, and pauses in New England, meeting me in the present moment of my own life. And sometimes when I walk down Main Street, I feel like that line is following me. And as I enter through the doors of this new, beautiful Ham Smith that I get to call my home, the line follows me into my classroom. Oftentimes, I'll give my students 10 to 15 minutes at the end of class to get a jump on their stories. And it's during these brief moments that I'll find myself leaning back and looking at their bowed heads, at their hands scribbling across the page, and I'll feel so grateful that that line that began 50 years ago is now moving through them. For much of my life, I believed that that gold bracelet that my aunt gave my mother on her wedding symbolized a failed American experiment. But these days, I understand that bracelet as an emblem of possibility and connection, of my mother's story to mine, of my story to the stories of my students, of my students' stories to yours. An emblem of all the stories that are still waiting to be written. Thank you.